to start with, it's rather strange language I use here, maybe, talking about selling your ideas. But I just wanted to make the point that my son is now calling me, so he's going to have to go away. I did mean to turn my phone off before, and you see, it all happens, doesn't it? The dog will bark soon, I can assure you of that, and then the lawnmowers will go off outside. But as I was saying, selling yourself and your ideas, we're not sales and marketing people, generally speaking, in finance. And it leaves us at a slight disadvantage sometimes when we're speaking to people who are very articulate in that way and are able to persuasive and get across their messages effectively. So we've got more of a challenge in terms of us being able to acquire those skills of influencing other people and persuading them that our ideas are right. So today I'm going to cover a little bit about what the research says, just so you got that. We like to have some facts and figures there. I'll share a selection of my top tips and frameworks around the topic of influencing, and then invite you, the audience, the participants, to share some of your top recommendations and learnings. And of course, it's vitally important for people in the Treasury profession to be able to influence others. There are people who will not understand the detail of what we know, and they need somehow to be influenced in order to make the right decisions. And it's no point just, I'm stating the obvious here, you all know the problem. Sometimes we will be going into too much detail for other people, but then without sufficient detail, how do we actually get them engaged? So we'll talk about that a little as we go through this. Now, I think most of you will know me. This is just a general slide. And just to point out, though, in some of the Strategic Insights podcasts, and there's a link there to them, but you can also find them on BuzzFeed, Spotify, Google, Amazon. You can find those Strategic Insight podcasts there, and they're often very, very short insights all around this topic. They're different, shall we say, angles to looking at how you strategically influence others. So I'm just popping up here our mission and vision, and these, this is why the ACT's here, and I guess that's why Treasurers chose their
Caroline, do you think you're changing the slides, because I'm still stuck on the first one? Oh, there we go.
Okay. Hopefully that's okay for everyone now. Yes, so basically the vision is the same as probably why you chose the profession. We want things to work well. We don't want companies to go bust. We don't want economies to go under. That's why we're here. But if we don't have the appropriate influencing skills, then we're a bit in trouble. This is all self-evident stuff. But what I found quite interesting when I was thinking about preparing for this session was just looking at our competency framework. And of course, it's very, very small there. But if we drill in, we can see that there is actually a section on influencing skills. And I've just blown it up a bit here for you to read the wording. It's one of the competencies that we'd expect people to have. And as you go through your career, we'd expect you to have greater competency in this area. And what I just highlighted in green there, though, was this idea about things being mutually beneficial and win-win, because I'll come back to that later when we're looking at a framework that talks about our motivational state. And I think it's important to think about that mutuality there. So research, what does it say? Well, you can see on this chart here that treasurers do feel they need to develop their leadership and strategic competencies. And if you look down that list as well, quite high up is people management skills and communication and relationship building skills. So we are saying that we really think these are the areas that we most need to develop ourselves in. And what's even more interesting perhaps and relevant is the biggest barriers to career progression. If we look at the top 5, you can see there leadership and strategic skills is absolutely the top. And then we've got stuff around understanding the business strategy. We've got communications and relationships, ship management coming in there again. And what I also find interesting on this one is when we look at the top scoring one, leadership strategic skills, it's the same across the world. There's no differences there. We're all saying the same thing, that is the biggest barrier to career progression. And this comes from our Business of Treasury research that we carry out every year with approximately 200 treasurers from around the globe. So that's what they are saying. Now, Brainworks, I thought, by way of introduction, I talk about some ways of looking at things that I've found really helpful in the past. One is understanding how we select data. And I think that's quite important because we need to understand how other people are selecting data as well as how we do it. And I'll explain it further in a moment or two. Finding win-wins because of state of mind is optimal, is important. And authenticity is really important. People can always see through you if you're not really being yourself. So knowing our intentions and knowing that we're being true to ourselves, really, really important things that help in our strategic influencing. And then I'll touch briefly on project management. And then I say here, and understanding how our mind works. And I'm going to touch on that first. It's a really simple thing, but your mind does what you tell it to do. So the more you repeat things to it, the more it will believe them. So if you're wanting to be an effective strategic influencer, I would suggest to influence other people, you've got to be in a pretty healthy state of mind, haven't you? You've got to be feeling quite confident, assured of what you're saying, and assured of the impact you can have on other people. So you do need to tell yourself that that's where you are and that's what you can do. And if you keep telling yourself you're not very good at influencing, or you're telling yourself, I'm really worried about this meeting, it's not going to go well, then that will influence your mind and perhaps certainly your performance. So thinking positively about things, it's worth taking some time out and doing that. And now I'm going to move on to, and I just put something in here because it's also about control, and these frameworks help us to have, I suppose, a sense of control, but also freedom to explore new things. And I'll come on to that when I talk about the model, the zone, more. And in some ways, it's also about knowing we have choices, even if it's, we don't have great choices, we have choices, and that frees us up to be thinking in the right way, to be able to communicate well and to influence other people. So a lot of what I like to focus on in this first section is about your state of mind, because that's important as the baseline. And then other things I'll talk about are just handy tips and tricks that you can use, and hopefully we'll get some more insights from the rest of you at that point. But this model here, this framework, it's the ladder of inference. It's called, and it tells us how we take observable data and experiences, just facts around us, and how we then start to select, and we start to apply meanings, make assumptions, draw conclusions, etc., as you can see up the ladder. And we don't have time today, but if you carry out exercises in a group and you're getting people to say something factual about another person, you'll find it very very common that they won't actually say something factual. They'll say something that has got an element of interpretation in it. So a common thing might be somebody would look at me and they say, oh, Caroline, you're married. That's an observation because I'm wearing something that looks like a wedding ring. But actually, the fact is I am wearing something that looks like a wedding ring. Somebody who's only just met me won't know whether I'm married or not. So it's that kind of thing that we tend to do. We tend to interpret, but it's also, it comes back to survival in the past. And if there was, if there was danger out there, some predator, or we knew that, so as I say, certain groups of people, when the tsunami came, they knew that the tsunami was coming because they could sense it and they saw the water going out. And they might not have had a tsunami in their lifetime, but it had been built into them to know that something was wrong by that happening, and then they would move away to safety. And that's how we survive. That's how we've survived over the millennia, I guess. And we still do it today, though. We will still, and we will start to select data, and it's based on past experience. And then as there's a feedback loop, so we start to then pick out the things that we think we need to pick out, and our feelings also get involved. If I had more time, we would go into this in more detail. But the point of it is that we're not very objective in our selection of data. So we will draw conclusions about people within the first 12 seconds of meeting them. What do we say about the dog? There she goes. So but I'm not going to mute because that would be a bit of a problem for this session. So we're just going to have to wait till she stops, hopefully. And I am so glad that you're all my friends, and she didn't do this during my Andrew Bailey interview, which would have been even more painful than it is now. And I'm just hoping someone is going to stop her in a moment, but there we go. So, so the point is that we tend then to select things and we make quick judgments about people. And it's a good lesson to understand this, because everyone is doing this around us. So as I say, so what, everyone is doing it, and we need to focus on facts, but we need to be explicit in communication. So when we're trying to influence other people, we have to really be aware that they might be quite different from us. They may have some preconceived ideas. I'll tell you one thing that I've noticed in my life for sure was, well, two things I'll comment on. When I introduced myself as a CFO, as I was a CFO for many years, people would treat me in a certain way. And this same Caroline Stockmann became a chief executive. And when she introduces herself to people now as a chief executive, she gets a different reaction. And can any of you guess what the reaction might be? Anyone want to offer anything up?
People are more attentive and pleasant to her.
Yes. Very good. Like, absolutely, they're more interested in me. CFO, it's conjuring up things of, this is somebody who likes numbers. This is somebody who might be a bit dull. This is somebody who once told me no. These are the police. Those kinds of things, those preconceived ideas that unfortunately people have about finance professionals. And you could try and fight it, but those they are there, and they're some of the barriers you need to break down in order to influence people successfully. Chief executive, that sounds quite interesting. That sounds, yeah, something that I could cope with. I've not really had a bad experience with a chief executive. Maybe that as well. And I also to be very open with you, when I was a lot bigger than I was now, I had some problems. I was very overweight. Then I was fortunately able to lose a lot of that weight. Sadly, a lot's come back on during COVID. But anyway, I lost a lot of that weight, and there was the slim new me again kind of thing. And I noticed a distinct change in people's attitude towards me. So again, people's preconceived ideas, a fat person is maybe a lazy person, a greedy person, a person who doesn't care about themselves. Those kinds of ideas people might have, no matter how misplaced, they are there. So it's really important, I think, as learning from this, to think about how others might perceive you, and to try and allay fears that they might have about what you are like as a person, but also be careful that we're not too, how should I put it, strong in any one direction, that we're not too perhaps eccentric, unless we choose to be so that people don't jump to a conclusion about us that's incorrect. And saying things in different ways is really important when we're trying to influence people, so that then those preconceived ideas are broken down. They're hearing things in a different way, and people do listen to things and learn things in a different way. Some people are very oral, some people are very visual, some people kinetic. So varying how you present, and that's probably one of the tips and tricks that we can talk about later. Motivational state, that's really important too, and we're not going to be able to effectively influence if our state of mind is one of, say, being in panic, not being confident about ourselves, etc. So this next framework I'm going to briefly run through, that was developed by a lovely gentleman called Bradford K. Brown. I've been allowed to use this over the years to help people, because I've found it really helped me. And basically, it sets out from the centre. We start with maybe the worst state of mind to find yourself in. So you're feeling impossibility, you just can't do things, it's impossible. And a slightly better state of mind to find yourself in is called survival, which is, I just have to do something, you feel you really must. Obligation comes next, and that's kind of, I should, and you can feel a little bit martyrish in this state of mind, but it's not so bad. And probably a very common one in most corporates would be desire. I have to have. Achievers feel this. I want to have, I have to have, I'm going to get. And that will deliver a lot for an organization and an individual. But around all of this is what we call the zone or willingness. And that is where you have all these kinds of words, these kinds of attitudes and feelings, etc., as you can see laid out here. Now, people may say, well, what use is this as a framework? Now, the point of it is that if we can recognize what kind of state we're in, we can do something about it. And this zone thing is really, really important in terms of strategic influencing, because if we can stand back and not be in that, even in that desire thing I have to have, but actually it comes back to this question of mutuality I mentioned earlier, and win-win situations. And I think the win-win is somewhere up here, or should be. But when we listen to others and we open our minds, then we're in a very good frame to hear other people, take on board their ideas, create something even better, but also to influence them, because we're on a kind of level, if you like. If we're in impossibility, we're just shrinking away, or if we just have to have something or do something, or we should, then we're not going to be in a good frame of mind to be able to influence others. So it's really important. I find this framework, and then you think, well, what can I do with this? It's all very well, but how do I get into that zone? For me, if I'm feeling one of those negative thoughts, as in the center of this chart, then I just say to myself, this is where you are. You know it's not going to do you any good. This is not doing you any favors. So are you going to stay in that place, or are you going to move out of it and consciously decide to be in a different place? And it really does work, I've found over the years, to be able to do that. It's about self-awareness, really. This framework allows you to think about yourself in a certain way and then say, I'm getting out of there. If I'm going into a meeting that's really important, I may decide to go in that situation of desire. I really want to win through on this one. But probably my better approach is to say, I'm going in there, I have my thoughts, my ideas, I want to influence, but I am actually going to, first of all, listen to other people. And by putting myself into the zone before I step into that meeting, then I'm able to much more effectively influence others, because people will start to trust you if they feel listened to. Everyone can spot you immediately when you come in aiming to have what you want and only what you want, and people don't like it. So it's a good framework, as I say, to think through. And then finally, on the frameworks, there's a tool I use for coaching. Some of you know I'm a trained coach from my Unilever days. And this tool that I speak about in my podcast, and you may have heard me speak about it before, so you can always look that up separately. But you go through this process in order to achieve a result. But the really important one, I find, particularly next to visualization, is intention. And this is when you've got a goal that you want to achieve, you ask yourself, why? Why do I want to do that? And you'll come up with an answer. And then you need to ask yourself again, why? So why do you want to, I'll pick an easy one. Why do you want to lose weight? I want to be healthy. Why do you want to be healthy? I want to live longer. Why do you want to live longer? I want to be there for my family longer. Why do you want to be there for your family longer? You see, it goes on. In the end, you probably say, well, because I love my family. And then you know you can't go any further than that, because there isn't really anything further to say. You'll know naturally when you come to that point. So I love my family. There isn't anything more I can say about it. That is my intention. So when you know your intention, you know what's behind it, and you can cling on to that when times are getting rough. But why I mention it here is sometimes we have goals and the intention isn't actually good. So by carrying out this exercise when we're wanting to influence people on a particular point, by saying, why do we want to influence them? We can get to the bottom of whether it's actually a good reason that we have, a worthy reason that fits with our values, or that it's actually not good enough. And that is really, really important, because it comes down to, as I said at the beginning, authenticity. And really, if you're trying to do something that you don't really believe in, actually, when you think about it, then you're not really going to succeed, because people will spot that. They always do. Project management, final little bit on this is, and you can read the question there. I've only found one person in the thousands of people I've spoken to this, spoken about this to over the years, that has said they actually have done this. The funny thing is, when we've got other important things to do, whether it's planning a family holiday or planning a project at work, a treasury management system implementation, normally speaking, we would plan. We would look at the resources we had. We would look at the timing, what were our objectives, what were the milestones along the way, all those kinds of things. What we tend to do with softer skills, as they call them, is not plan at all. We either think we go on a course and then we'll just be able to do it, but maybe a couple of refresher courses, etc. Or maybe we even think, well, I'm not naturally good at it, but it's practice. Anyone can do anything with sufficient practice. So softer skills don't have some kind of exclusive thing that you're only born with them. You can learn them, but it is about practice and applying time to them. So if we don't apply time, if we don't apply structure, then the question is, how good are we going to be at strategic influencing? So my advice on this one is, if there's something, an area of your influencing skills that you need to improve on, or maybe just the whole topic of strategic influencing, then set yourself a plan and look at how you can achieve your goals, because it's the same as anything else in life, as I say. So that is, I think, the end of the my frameworks, and I'm just going to whiz through some top tips for influencing before we open up to have a bit of a chat with others to get their tips. So being grounded yourself, a lot of the frameworks I was talking about was about being grounded. If you're not at ease, if there's something you're not convinced by, and you're not comfortable, that will come across. So it's really important to put some effort into that being grounded, as I say. Knowing your customer, knowing the person you're trying to influence, the more information you can gather about them, maybe you haven't met them before and you're going into your first meeting with someone. Well, fortunately today we can do a lot of research on the internet, and the more information you have, or if you know somebody who knows the person, just try to find out a bit what they are like, because then you'll be able to also perhaps put yourself into their position, think back to the ladder of inference and think, how are they going to feel about me coming in with this particular proposal? It can also not be just a proposal, but it can be the new boss. It can be anywhere where you need to strategically influence. Now, building trust. How do you build trust? Well, there's a few simple tips and tricks to that. Sharing something about yourself. We've been quite good at doing that through COVID. Online, we've been talking much more about our pets that bark while we're online, or our family, our children that are trying to call. My husband's still not picking up the phone. And sharing those things creates a bond between people. With my mother, who I've sadly lost last week, I would talk about her to other people, and I would find any number of other people who were going through similar situations with their parents, and we built a relationship that way. Also, being helpful to other people. So maybe saying, I hear this is the example I always give, sorry, but I hear it's going to rain later, you might want to take an umbrella, something like that. Or I hear there's a traffic jam up at whatever, or trouble on the trains, something that's helpful to other people. That also sets a kind of relationship and a bit of trust there. When you're coming with a proposal as well, it's often, I think people often say it's good to come with a few choices, options, or apparent options. But David Mead, the mentalist, has a great piece of advice here that I've borrowed, shall we say. When you're going to propose something and you have a selection of things, position the one that you want to succeed as third. Because when you go in, the first thing that you propose, generally people they're just not ready. Psychologically, they don't want to pick the first thing. And they're getting a bit warmed up by the second, but they will go for the third option, I suppose, as long as it's within reason. And if you have other options, you may have prepared 5 different options, anything after the third won't really count. By then, they kind of are saturated. So you can try it out, and I have tried it out, and it does seem to work. And of course, possibly the people you're doing with might start to know what's going on, but it isn't a hugely widely shared fact that I'd heard before a couple of years ago. So that's another tip. And then the other thing I just want to touch on here is if you're asking somebody to say yes, it's much more difficult for them to say yes than no. Again, it's just human psychology. So if you are wanting to suggest that you really need a new treasury management system, if you say, you know, we need a new system, there's all these things going on, and could you approve us doing this? Could you approve the capital spend? And well, that's difficult for somebody to say yes to. If you, however, position it as, do you want us in the next months potentially to suddenly have a failure where we are not going to be able to transfer funds, and we'll not be able to pay suppliers, or will not be able to get the right exchange rates, or anything you can think of that's related to Treasury. The answer is going to be no, of course. No, they don't want that. So when positioning something that you want, if you can reframe it so you're asking for a no instead of a yes, that's another useful tip. So now is the point at which we can start to share top tips and questions, and I've got my standard slide reminding you of things to attend after this conference, but I'm going to stop sharing, I hope, in just a moment. If I can see back to where we are here, and let's see if it will stop sharing. Has that stopped sharing, or can you see my screen? Now I'm going to stop sharing there. I think I've stopped sharing now. Are we back to normal? Very good, very good. So that was kind of a real whiz through some things that actually need quite a lot of thought, but I hope that it prompted you, maybe if you're curious, if you haven't heard about them before, you'll be able to explore. And certainly most of the things that I've talked about in those frameworks, I've referenced in one or other of my podcasts, if you'd like to go there to find out more. But what I'd really be interested in now is hearing from you guys. What are the things that you have found helped you in influencing others? What are your beliefs in what makes you successful with other people when you're wanting to present your case, if you like? So I'm going to open up the floor, and if you feel more comfortable raising a hand on the system, then I can invite you to speak. But otherwise, do jump in and just speak up. Agnes, we have our first hand. Agnes, would you like to say something?
Yes, please. Hi, Caroline. Hi, everyone. It's not really a tip from me. I was actually going to ask you a question, if that's okay.
I should have asked for questions, and I didn't.
But it's a topic that's linked to influencing and how to plan for it. So obviously, we're talking about having a plan, and I mean, my experience is that to make sure we kind of cater for all the different audience, for our own style, there's just so much to think about. It really takes planning over a long time, but also even just planning, I don't know, a speech or, I don't know, a team meeting or whatever, where you actually really want to influence and do it well. And I was going to ask you how you plan for it, and I know you also look at your energy levels when you think about your planning. I was just wondering if you could just expand on that a tiny little bit, because I think it's really helpful for this context.
Yeah, no, thanks, Agnes. Absolutely. You mentioned energy there, and it's not always possible to make everything in life fit around your own energy and so on, but we do really need to be aware of our energy levels. And there's two things that I like to look at there. One is looking at what gives me energy and what takes energy away from me. And I've puzzled many bosses over the year, because they think she's so busy, she does so much. What they don't understand at first is, if I'm not busy, then I'm not motivated, I'm not inspired, and I get energy from that. So I'm actually much more efficient. I'm just better at what I do if I have that energy through that variety and also the contact with people. But of course, there are situations where I know that my energy will be drained. So I'd recommend to people, if you've got that person who really, you go into the room, the virtual room, the physical room, and the moment they start to speak, you just start to sag. and everything is taken out of you. I don't know if you recognise that, but I think there are sometimes people like that, or there are topics like that as well. Try and avoid them if you can. And we're not all the same, so it's quite legitimate if you're finding something is sucking everything out of you to ask a colleague to go to that meeting instead, if it's possible, because they are a different person and they won't have the same energy experience as you, most likely, and they might find it's absolutely fine. So do use diversity of your team in that way, but have a think, about how you gain your energy, how you lose it, and try and make sure that each day you're getting more energizers than energy takers. And then I also like to have a look at the time of the week, time of the day. Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? How about on Monday mornings or Sunday mornings, if that's the day of the week you start work? Are they difficult for you? How about the end of the week on a Thursday or a Friday, whatever the end of your week happens to be? How do you feel then? Are you energized or are you really sagging at that point? And then by looking at all of this, understanding yourself well, you can start to plan in when you do your most strategic work. If there are really important meetings, you may be able to angle to get them at a time that will really work well for you. You certainly can plan in when you're going to do your own strategic planning. You can put that in your diary at times when you're most effective. And also, I think, and as you and I have discussed this before, thinking about environment. If you're preparing for something and you're wanting to really think strategically, do you want to do it behind your computer? Or is it actually something that a long walk or a run or a shower will help you with better? So it's some of those really practical things around energy, how you're feeling, can be very important as part of the planning process. And then to your first point, Agnes, yes, we often, sometimes you can't cater for everything. You can't plan to the nth degree, because often, I always say, the board meeting that you think is going to go swimmingly well, usually something happens and it's an absolute nightmare. And the one that you're really worried about is smooth as anything. So you can't always tell, but one thing for sure is if you have prepared and if you have thought of all the different angles, instead of kind of naively going into a meeting thinking, it'll be okay, I've done this before. If you have thought through for important meetings, then they will go better because you will be better prepared. So I hope that answered a little bit of that question, Agnes.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. And next, we got a couple more hands up. First of all, up was William Lawrence. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question or give your tip, William?
Well, my tip, I think, is actually just to feed off people and try and pass by ideas to people, because sometimes you make small little errors, like you don't put it in a logical way, or your logic is not the way that other people think of things, and sometimes passing it by someone that knows nothing about Treasury or something like that, you can pick up where you may be diverging from the point, or doing something that is too technical, or people don't understand or don't know why that flows from that to that. So I think that's key. And the other thing that I do that I find helps is that I don't try and send, if I've got a PowerPoint slide in a meeting tomorrow, I try and send it out in the morning and do one scan through everything just to make sure there's no silly things like a spelling mistake or something like that, that everyone's going to focus on the spelling mistake rather than what you're actually saying. So I'm dyslexic, so that kind of thing happens to me. So, but yeah.
Whereas, yes, so you have to work harder than others who aren't dyslexic. As I know from a good friend of mine telling me about doing her PhD. Yeah, you have to put much more effort in, but it's a good tip for other people.
Looking for
they don't need to put that effort in. So
I need a couple of pens. And the other thing I
somebody is
really need is a
in the
bunch of
background
FedEx.
about getting some pens. If you could go on mute, please, that would be really helpful. Much as we are really interested in your pens, but not quite at this moment. So we love it, don't we, this virtual world? It's such fun. Just teasing there. But yeah, William, also, as you pointed out, using guinea pigs. Brilliant, really good tip for that, because you actually, yeah, you're de-risking yourself totally by getting opinions from people who are different from yourself, and it's particularly important when you're going to be speaking with people who are not trained in the same way as you. So you're not going to speak to a group of treasurers but someone else. Absolutely great tip there, William. We've got Charlotte with her hand up next. Charlotte, over to you.
Thanks, Caroline, and just to say I'm so sorry to hear about your mother. That must have been a terrible loss, and you know, feeling for you there. I actually wanted to ask about the emergence from lockdown into this new hybrid world, and you know, I'm sort of thinking back to March of last year. I think we were all feeling a quite sort of certain amount of dislocation, getting used to doing everything online and getting Zoom and Teams, etc., all working on our laptops. But I mean, now I'm finding a similar dislocation in getting used to going from real meetings to virtual meetings, and things like this happened to me today coming back from a meeting by train. The train was sort of half an hour late and throwing everything out. And I suppose that, I mean, I know that if sort of working in international contexts, as many of us do, we are used to, you know, we're not expecting everybody to be in the room, as it were. But I still think this dislocation may require new types of focus in order to communicate and influence. And I just wondered if you had any tips or suggestions for that.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, isn't it? And as you say, we had to get used to this new world, and we did a lot of talking around you can't read body language and you can't do this and that and the other. And it was interesting. I was speaking to someone the other day, a lady called Callie Reason, and she did a lot in TV, and she's been in boardrooms, and she's a stand-up comedian as well. It's a really interesting lady, and she said, you know, we never had problems before sitting down and viewing a large screen for many hours as our you know, form of leisure, as in TV and films, etc. I thought, you know, that's really interesting, because we didn't, but because we were forced to go virtual with our work, then we decided we would point out all the things we didn't like about it. And going back to my point earlier about the mind over matter, I think that's one of the first things I'd say, Charlotte, is tell your mind what you think would be helpful for it to know. If you're going to tell it that this is going to be a really difficult time, and don't know how to deal with this, and I don't like this change and so on, then you're going to feel that way, and you're going to be pretty miserable. Whereas if you tell your mind, oh, this is great, now we can make the best of both worlds, and we can build, you know, different opportunities and the way we communicate, etc., etc., then you will feel that way. And I think the other main thought on the topic, is I don't want to rant on too long, is really about appreciating what are the things we need to be together for. And they're not just to have meetings. We can have meetings just like this. It's other things. So if we decide that we're going to start having more physical meetings and going back into our office so that we can meet with people, I don't think that's right. I think we need to be using the time when we're together to do the things when we're wanting to brainstorm and bounce ideas off each other in maybe a different environment, or when we want to just be in each other's presence so we can overhear what's happening with somebody else's call or how their day is going. We want the social side of it, where we can, you know, get to know people in a different way, because but not lose the way we've been learning more about people actually online. And I think all of that, you mentioned the train, it's going to take some adaptation. We're probably going to have to be really careful with our diaries, because if we're moving in between these kind of different states, and then we do have a delay on the train, but we're expecting to be on time for all these many online meetings we have, or if we want to keep up that huge volume of emails that we've been experiencing recently, but we're trying to also travel places at the same time, is just not going to be possible. So I think, you know, some thought around that, but also, yeah, thinking about what are the times that we need to be with other people, and how does that affect strategic influencing? So what are the moments that are really important? So that's what I'd say. But just a few thoughts there. I know we've got 3 more hands up, and we're kind of running out of time, but I thought it was an hour session. It's only 45. I got a warning a couple of minutes ago. So what we'll do is we'll carry on with questions, and if people have to drop out, that's fine, but we'll carry on a bit longer because, well, not questions necessarily, but tips and tricks as well. I'm eager to hear, but do feel free to ask questions as well. So I think, Philip, it's your hand up next.
Yes, it's more a work in progress than a tip or a trick that I have, as it were. But I think I realised a little while ago that the most important thing that was expected of me in my role was for me to be in control of everything that was going. And so I have recently started an approach of pretending to be in control. And slowly but surely, I've worked out the sort of things that I need to know to be able to give a sort of realistic pretense of being in control. And I'm finding increasingly that is helping me to actually be in control. So the sort of old adage of fake it until you make it is kind of working for me. So it was just an observation that actually that sort of control, but also the sort of almost fill backwards from where you need to get to, start from there and fill backwards, is something that I'm finding is working for me.
Well, thanks for that. That's really, really helpful. And I like you mentioning, in particular, like you mentioning that walking the talk. And there is a great book by Heminia Ibarra called Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. And it's around that kind of thing. And if we take strategic influencing, we kind of know what that is. We know what we want it to be, I guess. If we just pretend to be doing it, if we act the part, it will then happen, because that's what it's all about. It's practice. I'm an ex-musician, as some of you will know. It is about practice. When you do something repeatedly, you become familiar with it. It becomes natural for you. And if you don't do it, then you'll feel uncomfortable. But if we practice being strategic influencers and what we feel that is, and the way you would go about that, then we can become that. So thanks again, Philip, for your tip. And I've got Sam Robinson now.
Hi, Caroline. Thanks very much, firstly, for the session. It's been very interesting to hear your insight and everyone else on the call as well. I just wanted to say, I think we talked quite a lot about the kind of way of maximizing the sort of success and influencing people in the first instance, but I've actually had a few situations where I've proposed something or tried to move potential change, and I hate resistance and had no quite a lot. Whereas I've actually found that you don't necessarily have to accept that initial no, and if you persist, you might find that you potentially caught somebody on the wrong day, or you need to frame something a different way to a senior manager, or you might find that things have changed in a few months' time, and you might then get a different answer. So I'd be interested to hear maybe you or anyone else on the call sports if they've had similar experiences. And
absolutely. Well, I think there's, all brownie points for being tenacious. I mean, you don't want to become a pain in the proverbial, of course, and there's tactful ways of doing things, but absolutely, people will value, if somebody cares about something so much that they're willing to come back on it, then they're more likely to listen. And as you say, somebody can just be caught out on a bad day, but that also is a good tip to think about, your timing on things. If you're rushing into an important meeting with somebody, and you know that they're getting ready for it, so that's not the time to ask them, for a pay rise or whatever it happens to be. So there's a bit of forethought, but I'll just open it up before I move on to the next hand that was up. Just, is there anyone who'd like to respond to Sam, on their thoughts about that, being tenacious and coming back? Anyone else had that experience? Agree that that's a good approach?
Actually, Caroline, my point was just coming quite handy to Sam's point, actually. In my experience, when I want to influence people, and this is a piece of advice I had a few years back, and I found that it's quite powerful, is that when we're preparing in order to go into a meeting and influence people, a lot of people usually focus on positions. I want to get out of that meeting and achieve X, and we lock ourselves into that position. If we just walk in, and I think this also goes back to what you were saying before, Caroline, about being the first choice and not the third one, or even tell your mind. I think if you tell your mind that you're not going to focus on positions, but you're going to focus on people's interests. Think quite carefully what your interests are with respect to that argument and with respect to that conversation you're going to have. But do not, but also think about the interests of the other people. And if you say, if you really teach your mind, I'm going to walk into that meeting with an open mind and focus on people's interests. If you suggest something and the other person pushes back, then you can start drilling down, okay, what's the logic behind it? What is your interest and why are you saying no? Because the reason why I'm saying X and you're saying Y is because my interests are this. And that way it is more likely to come to a common conclusion or a common agreement that serves both interests. And at least in my view, Sam, what you were saying, that could be a tip that could work in your case.
So thanks, Dina, for that, and I hope you find that helpful, Sam. It ties in very well also with that model I showed you of the zone. When you're in the zone, you do go in with an open mind and not with those fixed positions, as Dina said. And there's another little tip that I'll just add in there as well. And it's used sometimes when you're in difficult negotiations. There's a framework called playing baseball, but I won't go into that now. But the key element of part of it is repeating back to somebody what they have said to you. We may think that sounds rather odd, and we may think, well, you know, they might think you're just mimicking them, but actually saying back to somebody what they have said, almost word for word, gives them great reassurance. They don't hear it as you mimicking them. They hear it as you actually really having listened to them. And I don't mean paraphrasing, because often people get irritated with paraphrasing because it's not their words. It's not what it's not what they think they mean, even if you think you know what they mean. So by repeating back to somebody something they have said almost word for word, they know you're really, really listening and they appreciate it. So it's something to also consider in those situations, because when you want to influence somebody, a great starting point is for them to feel listened to, not just that it's all about you telling them. So that's another little tip. I think we need to close in a moment. Does anyone have anything, a burning point that they'd like to raise before we close for today? Well, just remains to say thank you very much for joining this session. I hope you picked up a couple of insights that you could use in the future in your strategic influencing. And if there are other thoughts, do pop thoughts into the discussion zone somewhere or other. Maybe, you know, in the we've got diversity and inclusion, or we've got well-being, but we can maybe bring in some of these things in there as well. So do feel free to start up a discussion there on a topic that you're interested in around strategic influencing is what I'm suggesting, and we can continue the conversation. But it remains to me to say, I hope you've enjoyed today's conference. Hope you enjoyed the rest of the week, and it's been lovely to see you and interact a little bit, which we don't always get to do on the platform when we're kind of interviewing people and things like that. So thanks again, everyone, and have a lovely evening or middle of the night for, you know, Alfred. I know you've been very good and called in the early hours in Hong Kong. So thank you all for joining, whatever time zone you're in, and have a good rest of your day, evening, morning, whatever it happens to be. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye.